Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time we're going to be taking our first look at these fantastic Robert Opie scrapbooks. So these books, well, if you've never come across them before, they chronicle the history of British packaging in books and toys and toothpaste wrappers and chocolate bars over the last century, and they're absolutely amazing. So they start in the late Victorian era, and they go all the way up to the 1970s, and each book covers a particular decade. So I've split them into two videos. So this time we'll be doing the first 5 books, and then the second video will go right the way through to the 1970s. These are absolutely amazing. I'm sure you're going to love it, and that will be the subject of today's video. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Okay then, so here is the very first book in the series. Now, the first thing to note is just how massive these hardback books are. I mean, it's difficult to tell really, but I mean, I've got big hands, and look, my hands don't even cover like halfway up the cover. So these really are your traditional sort of scrapbook size hardbacks. So I'm hoping, without too much trouble, that I can go through these and get pretty much the whole book in picture, with a bit of luck. Now, I'm not going to go through every single page and dwell over every single image, because there's just too much to get through. And I'm sure that when you see these books, you're just going to want to rush out and get your own copies. Now, this is the Victorian one. As I said, this is like the first one chronologically in the series. So it looks at what packaging was around in the late 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, and then 1900 to 1910. So he's covering quite a large area there of years, but I guess this was the very earliest sort of origins of a lot of these things. This is like, you'll see themes as we go through these. So he'll have the comics and like newspapers of the period. He'll have like the tobacco, cooking things, cooking implements and things like that. So we'll just see as we go through these how the series progresses. Obviously a lot of this is vintage advertising, which is once again another fascinating subject. Robert Opie himself is still alive today. He's in his 70s. He first bought his earliest bit of packaging in 1964 apparently, and it was a pack of old munchies, and that was the start of him starting to compile this amazing catalogue of packaging. And these are the photos that I particularly like, because this shows he'll do a similar one of this sort of photo for each decade. Some of it is just astounding, really. There's early sort of Cadbury's stuff there. And I remember going to the Cadbury's Museum in Birmingham, and even they didn't have some of this stuff. I mean, they just didn't, or if they did, they didn't have it on display. But this is just a taster, really, looking at the very earliest examples of what would be in the later books. Like these here, this is the very early cigarettes and matchbooks and matchbooks covers. I mean, there can't be many of these lying around. The early cigarette packets, or cigarette tins even, and tobacco tins. Later on you'll see board games of the period and greeting cards. Just incredible, the collection, absolutely incredible. These are some jigsaws here, some very early turn of the century jigsaws. It's really nice. And once again, these are the pages that I really like, because these have been staged. So these are like, sorry, it's a bit reflective, but you can see these are ones which, he spent a lot of time setting the scene, as it were. They're really incredible. And some children's books of the period. Board games, early board games, which started to become very popular. programmes and theatre programmes. Just what you would sort of expect from the Victorian era, people starting to go on holiday, little holiday brochures and things. So you get the idea. So this is the first book, which just looks at the Victorian era. And although not my favourite era by any means, I still find it fascinating, and it's worth having just to have the set, really. And this is quite interesting. So he's got events of the, down the spine here, events of the Victorian era, which is quite good, which he defines. Yep, so when Victoria came to the throne at 18, in 1837, right up to when she died in 1901. So that's basically the period, and just beyond, that's covered in this first book. So that is the Victorian Scrapbook, and that's the first one in the series. New Cavendish books. These were first published in 1999. The good news is you can still get them today. They're still in print, and I will of course put links to these in the description down below, so you can go straight to the Robert Opie page on Amazon if you so wish. Now this is the second book. This is the 1910's scrapbook, and this is the one predominantly devoted to the decade of the Great War. There's a lot of World War I memorabilia in this particular one. It's fascinating. Also the decade when the Titanic sank. It's also a thicker book than the first one because there's just so much more in here to look at. And just similar sort of format, so you'll get to recognise exactly what's what. There's a contents page now, so it's got looking at coronation, fashion, house and home, groceries, suffragettes, all sorts. So he does like his royal commemoratives, and these are just some of the many patriotic issues that were around at the time. The early days of women's fashion. Things were starting to change, that's for sure. And I mean, the books are just fantastic in the way of social commentary more than anything. This is the 1910's Larder. Just look at that. All those fantastic packages, and it's just so much to look at. You need to go through almost every page with a tooth comb. It's almost like Where's Wally for packaging. The early Burt's custard up there. It's just incredible, absolutely incredible stuff. I think on the suffragettes and the start of picture postcards, which were very prevalent during the First World War. I've got a few of those myself. And of course, what you will also find when you go through these books, you will start to see, aren't the first gramophones, you'll start to see stuff, think, oh, you know, I really fancy sort of collecting those. There's tins for your stylus on your gramophone, and I've seen lots of people collect those. I think I've got that red one up there somewhere in one of my little collections somewhere, a gramophone tin. It's the early comics and magazines of the period. Obviously there's things like Punch, but there was lots of other ones around as well. These are the comics now from the period, Boy's Own and Penny Wonder, Chuckles, Boy's Journal. And he really does sort of rub it in, Robert Opie, by not just having all of these, but having the first issue of each one as well. And that's another trend that you'll find. So if there's like a collection of rare books or rare annuals or you know, just rare cars, he'll have the rarest, most desirable one on display in his pictures, not the most common one, which is like incredible. This is on Boy Scouts and scouting. Once again, early board games, another fascinating era, and there were so many back in this period. It's really, really good. I love the fact that he's got all these board games covered. The Strand War Game. I said apologies for the slight reflection. These are good. So these are the early ball bearing puzzles. That one there, I had Silver Bullet, and I also had Trench Football at one point. These are sort of glass topped ball bearing puzzles. I used to collect those. I have since got rid of those in my collection, but I've got my 70s ones, the Pocketeers, which I have already filmed for the channel. Early nursing stuff. This is war-related posters. This is very, very good. This is, look at these, all different, these are like little, you would have them, you donate, and then you put a little, one of these into your lapel, because they're all like got little pins on, for different charities and causes. These are some posters here, patriotic posters again, of the period. Early Heath Robinson book, very, very rare, that particular book there. These are wartime picture postcards rather than military related ones. What's he going during the war period now? Fragments from France, which is Bruce Baumfather. He was the classic World War I cartoonist with some of his cartoons there. Even Bruce Baumfather Tommy there, very, very rare. Incredibly rare. But yeah, that's well worth looking at. Once again, the traditional cigarette page. This is very early cigarette packets from the 1910s. And you'll see these as cigarettes and tobacco. You will see this theme throughout the books. OXO, so another highly popular collectible subject is people collecting old OXO tins. And these were the very, very earliest ones from the First World War, where you actually, the OXO wasn't in cubes, you had to sort of make it up, and sort of rolled up. Look at the Zeppelins there, the dirigibles. Raw commemoratives again, so at the end of each book he does have a little look at the sort of raw commemoratives. And there, that absolutely classic poster, Daddy, what did you do in the Great War? Trying to urge people to volunteer. So there we are, once again another fantastic, fantastic book there. Great book on the Titanic there as well. Superb, really, really interesting period in British history there, and that's certainly one that I find fascinating. So now we move on to the 1920s. A fantastic, beautiful, beautiful cover on this one. And there's the back cover for you to have a look at. This one came out in 2003. I don't believe they came out in chronological order, but I have got them all now. I think Robert Opie's first book was one called Sweet Memories, and it was just concentrating on vintage sweet packaging. And it was only a very small little book, nothing as lavish as these, which is one I haven't actually got. However, after the annual sort of scrapbooks looking at each decade, he did do one book called, which I have got, called Remember When. And that sort of looks at all eras, and that does go a little bit later into the very early 80s, which sadly have not been done in a scrapbook style, which is a shame, because certainly there's enough time. They could do the 80s and 90s, I would think, nowadays, because enough time has actually passed. But anyway, this particular one then is the 1920s. So we'll have a little look at this and hopefully get through it. So there is the man himself, Robert Opie. He starts to appear in a few of the books. I said he's still around today. He did do, that's lovely, a Farewell to Arms hardback. He did do, as far as I know, Robert Opie, and I think I'm pretty sure they're still open. There's at least one packaging museum where you can actually go and visit this. So that might be something worth looking up. And if that's the case, I will put a link to the museum down below. So the 1920s kitchen larder. So you see some early crisp packets there. Once again, these tins and that, very similar to what we've seen before. Some OXO there, which is, you know, one of the brands I like, as well as HP sauce, which is another one. I love the old packaging on HP sauces. Double page of cigarettes now. So you see that these photos are done from overhead, and he's got the actual cigarette packets. So he must have an incredible collection of cigarette and tobacco packages, and they were a big part of people's lives back then. Virtually everybody smoked. Comedy postcards, those are quite nice, those Felix ones. Felix the cat, highly popular character back in those days. And then down below here you've got Bonzo the dog, and like a bulldog, another very popular character in British history. Really collectible sets of cards, those. Women's sort of fashion magazines again. These are nice. These are sort of programs. That's actually like a tin of some sort. Jazz time toffees. Fantastic. So these are like biscuit tins and sweet cigarette tins, and sweet tins. They're just fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. So these are some of the magazines. These are magazines aimed at women, by the look of it, of the period. Yeah, Modern Woman and Home Magazine. The start of women making homes. Romance there. This is post First World War. And you got the sort of the sporting and boys newspapers and comics and magazines. These are the comics pages now. So these are the ones that would have been launched in the 1920s. Really nice selection of early comics there. Fantastic stuff. These are the pages I like. Once again, so these are shelves which have got his board games sort of on display, and they're just fantastic. I really like the Zeppelin at the top there as well, which is really good. Just fantastic. And these are the pages that you'll really sort of pore over. Just awesome. Early Hornby Clockwork Train. I mean, the value of some of this stuff now is just incredible. Early books here. So these are early comic annuals from the 1920s. Pip and Squeak. Felix again, as I said, very popular character. A few odd board games. Absolutely superb stuff. So we've got the start of movies now, of course. So you've got the early books on the cinema. Still, the talkies hadn't quite come in, I don't believe yet, but with the cinema there. More magazines and more board games there. The start of radio coming in, early radio stuff. And of course the birth of the Radio Times. This is a double page spread of all very early issues of the Radio Times, with a little bit of history there behind it. Once again, a highly collectible magazine, and I have actually done a couple of videos on Doctor Who Radio Times, which are already on the channel. Another great spread here. This is on the British Exhibition, which was very big. It's 1924. This opened, and this is all memorabilia related to the British Exhibition. Newspapers, periodicals of the time. Some of these not actually British. This is the rise of communism, you see. Red Star, these are all sort of Young Comrade. These are early communist propaganda newspapers that were published in the UK. Very interesting. And then this is the birth of, well, not the birth, but this is a selection of some of the broadsheets that were around at the time. Comes to the Daily Express, the Evening Standard. Fascinating stuff. And then, of course, this is another page I absolutely love. This has got early London Underground timetables. I find these absolutely fantastic in their own right. The design and history of the Underground is just so good. And I do have some separate books and some of my own collection of these early programs, which maybe I'll pull out and pop into a video on their own, as well as a couple of books very similar to this, looking at London Underground and early GWR memorabilia, and just fascinating. Stuff like this is just almost iconic now, these fantastic posters, and you can buy these from the London Transport Museum. They are superb. Of course, motorbikes now starting to come into play. BSA, so the early motorbikes. And then we've got the start of cars, of course, you know. So there's a few car-related magazines, a car board game there. And then when there's cars, there's motorsports. So this is racing cars, some brilliant racing car games, and more sort of advertising related to that. These are, once again, the rise of the huge aircraft, the dirigibles, which I find fascinating. Big cruise liners. I guess the world had got over the fact that the Titanic had gone down, and they were prepared to go on big cruise liners again. And people going to further afield. See some of these are for like Australia. Southern Railways there. Another beautiful sort of Art Deco style poster there. The railways. What an interesting decade the 20s was, wasn't it? However, I do think the 30s slightly edges it out. This is the 1930s scrapbook. It's the next to last one we're going to look at today. I've still got the 40s to come. Great stuff again, and it's a very similar format to what we're used to, what we've already seen, but that is fine by me. So hopefully we've got all that in the picture, because they are quite big, these books, as I could say. So here we are. Here's the sort of breakdown again, the contents page. It's just superb. The 1930s, this sort of pre-war period, was very interesting. There were a lot of deniers, people, and the start of new inventions and things like that. So you can see here the early Hoovers and fridges and things like that. They're just incredible. This is another beautiful page. So you'll start to see a few more recognizable brands which started in the 1930s. The Lyle's Golden Strip, I mean, that's hardly changed to this day. There's early Heinz there, Heinz oven baked beans. I don't know if you see that down there. Bourneville and the Fry's chocolate. Some cereals up here, like your shredded wheat, very early cornflakes and Weetabix, porridge oats, Quaker oats. So a few little innovations coming into the British diet. The start of real treaty sort of chocolate stuff here. So just look at these little packets of Rolos, tiny little things, Kit Kats, chocolate, fried set of Jersey creams. Just fantastic to see some of these. And as I said, I did not see these in the Cadbury's Museum when I went there. Look at the Terry's All Gold there, and this is from the 1930s, and that's hardly changed today. So here's your domestic cleaning products, Brasso, for example, at the top there. And a lot of these sort of cleaning ones, Persil, Rinso. Good stuff. So ladies sort of beauty products now. So we've got down the bottom here these early talcum powder sort of displays here, and like stuff for your nails and things like that. The skin creams, and at the top there, very early toothpastes. There we are. And speaking to my dad, he says during this time when he was born, he can remember brushing your teeth with like salt. I mean, can you believe it? Awful. Women's magazines, Women and Home Building. Then women's fashion magazines as well from the periods. The 1930s was a period of high fashion. Then you got the men's side of it, and toddlers, so kids fashion as well, dressing the kids up. And just look at that selection of children's comics. What a decade it was for those, wasn't it? You got your Mickey Mouse Weekly, Wild West, Hotspur, Gem, the Beano and the Dandy were both launched. Interestingly, he's got numbers 2 of the Beano and number 2 of the Dandy. I wonder what happened to number 1s, if he's still got those. Tiny Tots, Puck, all good stuff. Hotspur. So we got some very early sort of toys and memorabilia, and Meccano there. Obviously the 1930s saw the early Disney films, so we got some memorabilia on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs there. Yeah, early Monopoly at the top, football games, blow football. Some great stuff there. Some children's annuals there as well again, some Mickey Mouse annual, Pip and Squeak. Hornby sets, very, very early and massively collectible sets now. Some of these are in the thousands. Once again, looking at broadcasting, so you got issues of the Radio Times, going outdoors, open air, hiking. More car related memorabilia, booklets, things like that. Copies of Motor magazine. And obviously the styles have changed now to incorporate the 1930s vehicles. These are early holiday brochures. They're really, really nice, Art Deco style. These are all fantastic in their own right. Very, very distinctive style, and they're lovely, absolutely lovely. Here's some more for overseas. So the previous page was the UK. These are for overseas travellers. And people would go on excursions abroad or voyages. So these are for people going on cruise liners. Cunard there. White Star Line. Off to America. I mean, these are just beautiful, beautiful bits of history. Looking at flying now, so commercial flying had started to come in, so people could jet off. Traditional board game that went in with it. The cinema again, so the talkies were well and truly in evidence now, and some early movie stars like Clark Gable, for example, Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland. So these are film magazines of the period related to those movies. These for the radio stars, so radio was bigger than ever, so you got copies of the Radio Times there, and Radio Fun for the youngsters. A few more radio mags. Amateur wireless for people tinkering with electronics. The cigarette page again, so once again another incredible selection of cigarette and tobacco memorabilia from the time. And then the early cigarette albums. So this is one with the cigarette cards in. There's Association Footballers. I bet you that's rather expensive. 1935 to 1936. A cigarette album with footballers in. Radio stars. Fantastic. Beautiful page, that one. And greetings cards. A Valentine's Day. First time we've seen that. And fireworks. So this is lots of people collect these early fireworks, and a lot of these designs haven't changed to this day, to be honest. The standard fireworks is still a brand that's known. Massive gaudy packaging on these, and I said these are still around today. Christmas crackers, Christmas cracker boxes. Look how brilliant these are. What designs, eh? Oh, who wonders what toys are inside them. Then the royalty bit, the royal commemoratives. Edward the 7th. Another page of royal commemoratives. Board games, I mean, just incredible. Absolutely incredible. And the final page there, looking at the newspapers of the day, the main events of the 1930s leading up to 1939, so the release of Gone with the Wind of the Wizard of Oz and the outbreak of the Second World War. So that is the 1930s scrapbook. So the last one we're going to look at in this video is the Wartime Scrubbers. It says From Blitz to Victory, 1939 to 1945. And this one obviously looks at the Second World War years. Very, very similar style to what we're used to from the previous books, as you can see. And once again, a really fascinating period in British history. A lot of this stuff is very accessible to this day. It's, if you wanted to track any of it down, and you might find that some things during this, you think, oh, they look so good, I'd like to get them today. Looking at the blackout in women's weeklies, magazines, all looking at what they can do to help with the war effort. Early Ministry of Home Security poster there. Always carry your gas mask, and there is the gas mask, and then the children's version of the gas mask. Looking at your barrage balloons, and a couple of kids' books related to the barrage balloon. The Defence ABC painting book, another very rare children's book there. Some of these are still common to this day because they had such massive print runs. Things like this, the Battle of Britain, for example, issued by the Home Office. Got a copy of that in my loft somewhere. ARP, so air raid precautions, what to do in the event of an air raid. Obviously anything from this period is very, very scarce, but if anyone's going to have it, Robert Opie is the wartime cigarette issues. So you see everything was affected by that. So because they were paper rationing, the boxes are not made of cardboard, they're sort of like wax paper. Some of them say war packaging on them because that was just the what it was at the time. So this was not an age of affluence by any means. This was an age of scrimping and saving to get through the war, because it was pretty tough. So a penguin up there, another very rare one, in fact. A wartime rare penguin goes for about £25–30. Wartime Christmas cards, women's fashion there. See, there just wasn't so much in this decade to show because people were all in uniform. Fashion, I guess, became a bit of a backseat. Patriotic boys' comics of the period would all be telling patriotic war stories. These were the next generation of soldiers, don't forget. 1940s board games, so these are all pretty much wartime related, and there's some real rare ones there, as you can imagine. Nice RAF book there. Taking the mick out of Hitler, that was a common theme in some of these. Sort of music hall programs. These are aircraft recognition books. So those were the two that Penguin did during the war, aircraft recognition 1 and 2, which are very common because they have massive print runs on those, and they were reprinted several times. But they're still fascinating to look at, the Penguin aircraft recognition books. Dig for Victory, well, we know all about that, and growing your own became very, very popular at this time as a way to keep yourself fed. This very, very interesting page. This is wartime chocolate bars and rations, so an early Mars bar there. I've shown in some of my Penguin videos at the back where they've got adverts where they've cut the Mars bar into segments to reward it for good work. Some things like Maltesers, for example, were sold in a little bag, so there isn't actually any sort of packaging that's survived, generally speaking, on those. Those are like sweet wrappers up the side there. I mean, just incredible. Look at that crunchy. So this is the first time we're seeing some of these, and they really are fascinating. There's a Rolo there, a Rolo on the side. The Women's Land Army. ATS. It's RAF related and things related to the Home Guard. Wartime cartoons. Not quite to the extent of the First World War. This is quite interesting. So this is a bit of the American influence. The Americans arrived in January 1941, and of course they brought their American brands with them. So, you know, you've got your Chesterfields, Lucky Strikes, Camels, and the cigarettes, and then Hershey bars and Nestle, Babe Ruth bars, and chewing gum, Wrigley's chewing gum there. So all of that came over when the Americans came to Britain prior to D-Day. Once again, these are little rewards that were given out if you made donations. That's one's there for relatives of the prisoners of war stuck overseas. The fact that those have even survived is just incredible. And then you've got your Wartime Larder. So a very, very difficult period in British history, but fascinating all the same to see what was around in the 1940s. So a few brands there. The first time I spotted Marmite in what would become a similar brand, and the Commons mustard there. Loads of stuff that you might recognise. Vim. And then you've got a look at the Radio Times, broadcasts, a bit of patriotic stuff again. And then this is interesting. So here's a space for your own family memories. So if you've got stuff or family photo during the war, that would be a good little spot to put it in. So there we are. So it's like a selection of like advertising, ration books, what to do in the event of an air raid, and just so much in there to look at. It just hours and hours. But there we are. So that is the first 5 of the Robert Opie scrapbooks, and they are absolutely fantastic. So I hope that's whetted your appetite for part 2, which will be coming in about a week or two's time, where we'll look from the 1950s up to the 1970s, the Royal Special that he did, as well as Remember When, which is his like all decades look at packaging. So if you have enjoyed this video, do please give it a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing for regular vintage content. I'd love covering this sort of thing. I've got lots of book videos already on my channel, amongst other things. So if you do fancy more of that, do please check out the other videos that I've got available. And I shall look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.